Have you ever had to play peacekeeper in your household?
You know that exhilarating yet nerve-wracking moment when, after enduring the heartbreak of a contentious divorce that left you questioning every decision you'd ever made about love and family, you finally muster the courage to purchase what seems like the perfect fixer-upper home in a sleepy Ohio suburb called Willow Creek. Envisioning lazy summer barbecues in the overgrown backyard and cozy movie marathons with your teenage children who have been through just as much emotional turmoil as you have, only for what should have been a straightforward bathroom renovation to unravel into utter chaos because the seasoned plumber you've hired suddenly pales to the shade of the outdated porcelain sink he's working on, his calloused hands trembling uncontrollably as if he's just unearthed a long-forgotten family curse, and in a hushed, urgent whisper that sends icy shivers racing down your spine, he insists that you must pack your belongings immediately and evacuate the premises without uttering a single word to your kids about the reason behind this abrupt departure, compelling you to cast a terrified glance toward the newly exposed basement doorway concealed behind the crumbling tiles where darkness seems to pulse with unspoken threats, causing your heart to seize in your chest like a vice grip, and in that split second of paralyzing fear, you snatch whatever essentials you can and flee into the unknown, forever altering the trajectory of what you had hoped would be your sanctuary of renewal. I had poured every ounce of my savings and optimism into acquiring that charming yet dilapidated Victorian house on Elm Street, the kind of place with intricate gingerbread trim that hinted at stories from a bygone era and spacious rooms that promised to heal the fractures in our little family after my ex-husband Tom, and I had called it quits 2 agonizing years earlier amid accusations of infidelity and financial deceit that still made my blood boil whenever I thought about it, especially since Emma, my sharp-witted 16-year-old daughter, who was already navigating the complexities of high school drama and her first serious crush, and Jake, my 14-year-old son whose world revolved around online gaming tournaments and avoiding any form of emotional vulnerability, deserved a stable environment where they could rebuild their sense of security without the constant shadow of their father's manipulative phone calls demanding updates on our lives as if he still had a stake in them. Beyond child support payments, the upstairs bathroom became my inaugural project in this ambitious home transformation. A confined space overwhelmed by garish wallpaper patterns reminiscent of the 1970s that peeled away in stubborn curls and carried a persistent undercurrent of mildew that no amount of lavender-scented air fresheners could fully mask, prompting me to schedule an appointment with Mike Harlan, a reliable local plumber in his mid-50s whose weathered pickup truck bore the scars of countless jobs, and whose community reputation rested on his ability to tackle stubborn clogs and leaky pipes affordably while sharing lighthearted anecdotes about the quirky secrets hidden within Willow Creek's aging residences, such as misplaced heirlooms from the Great Depression era that occasionally surfaced during routine repairs. He arrived promptly that crisp Tuesday morning in early October, lugging his massive toolbox with the ease of someone who had done this routine 1,000 times before, his breath tinged with the aroma of black coffee from the diner down the block as he surveyed the room with a professional eye and cracked a few jokes about how these old houses always conspired to reveal their mischief just when you least expected it. Perhaps a forgotten stash of vintage moonshine tucked behind the baseboards, which elicited a genuine chuckle from me as I handed over the replacement faucet components I'd sourced from the nearby hardware store during a weekend errand run, feeling a rare surge of empowerment because for the first time in years, I was the one calling the shots on our household improvements without Tom's overbearing critiques about budget overruns or aesthetic choices that he deemed too feminine for his taste. While Mike methodically dismantled the surround of the clawfoot tub, his hammer striking the tiles with a rhythmic cadence that echoed reassuringly through the plumbing vents and provided a comforting backdrop to my mundane tasks downstairs, I sorted through a pile of overdue bills in the kitchen and steadfastly ignored the barrage of insistent text messages from Tom, who was pressuring me to expedite the sale of the house so he could claim his portion of the equity faster than legally required, his words laced with that familiar entitlement that had driven me to the brink during our marriage, particularly after I had discovered his affair with a colleague from the local bank through a carelessly left open email. On our shared laptop, a betrayal that still stung like salt in an open wound every time he tried to insert himself back into my decisions. The steady progress upstairs lulled me into a false sense of normalcy until abruptly the hammering ceased, replaced by an audible gasp that sliced through the quiet like a knife, causing me to abandon the scattered paperwork and hurry up the staircase in my worn slippers that slapped against the polished oak treads worn smooth by generations of footsteps, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios ranging from a burst pipe flooding the foundation to some unforeseen electrical hazard that could ignite the entire structure. What I encountered upon bursting into the bathroom froze me in place, for there was Mike on his knees beside the section of drywall adjacent to the vanity where he had been removing the old medicine cabinet. His robust frame hunched forward with an unnatural rigidity, his complexion ashen and devoid of its usual ruddy hue as though all the blood had drained straight to his toes, and his hands, typically steady as they wielded tools with precision, now quivered so violently that the crowbar he had been using clanged loudly against the cracked linoleum floor, drawing my eyes inexorably to the irregular gash he had carved into the wall, which exposed not the expected bundle of insulation or wiring, but rather a concealed vertical shaft that plunged downward into obscurity, revealing a narrow flight of wooden stairs leading to what appeared to be an extension of the basement I had only glimpsed once during the home inspection, the air emerging from this hidden aperture laden with a profound chill that infiltrated my light sweater and bore the distinct, unsettling odor of moist soil mingled with a faint, metallic tang that evoked rusty pipes or something far more sinister buried deep within the earth. Overwhelmed by the intensity of his reaction, I demanded to know what he had discovered down there that warranted such alarm, but Mike merely locked his gaze onto mine with an expression of profound dread etched into every line of his face, his voice emerging in a barely audible rasp that urged me to gather my family's possessions without delay and vacate the property immediately, emphasizing with desperate clarity that under no circumstances should I inform Emma or Jake of the true nature of this urgency, just to get out while we still could, a directive that bypassed all rational thought processes in my brain and ignited an instinctive flight response honed from years of navigating Tom's unpredictable tempers. Adrenaline surged through my veins like wildfire as I pivoted on my heel and dashed down the hallway to the bedrooms, my fingers fumbling with zippers on duffel bags as I haphazardly shoved in armfuls of clothing, school books, and toiletries, my shouts for the children to assemble their backpacks echoing through the house without providing any context for the panic, because how does one articulate to impressionable teenagers that their anticipated haven of stability might harbor dangers lurking just beneath the surface without shattering their fragile trust in my judgment? Within minutes, we were scrambling out the front door into the bracing autumn breeze that whipped fallen leaves across the driveway, the engine of our reliable station wagon roaring to life as I accelerated away from the curb with tires squealing slightly, stealing frantic glances in the rearview mirror at Mike's silhouette still rooted in the bathroom threshold like a sentinel guarding a forbidden realm. Yet even as the distance grew between us and the house, an insidious curiosity clawed at the edges of my fear, compelling me to fabricate an excuse about a precautionary gas leak inspection after depositing the kids at school and looping back to the property under the cover of midday quiet. Parking discreetly a few houses down to evade any watchful neighbors, I let myself in through the unlocked side entrance with my spare key still clutched tightly in my sweating palm, my footsteps muffled as I ascended once more to the bathroom where the tarp Mike had hastily secured over the opening billowed faintly in the draft from below, and summoning every shred of resolve I possessed, I peeled it aside and descended those treacherous stairs into the enveloping gloom, the wooden steps, groaning under my weight and releasing puffs of ancient dust that danced in the narrow beam of my smartphone's flashlight, the atmosphere at the base thick with cobwebs that brushed against my face like spectral fingers and stacks of mildewed cardboard boxes from prior occupants that loomed like forgotten sentinels in the corners. It was amid this subterranean disarray, on the uneven dirt floor that felt unnaturally compacted as if concealing layers of compacted history, that my light caught a subtle gleam partially embedded in the soil. prompting me to kneel and excavate a delicate silver locket encrusted with tarnish and its chain knotted in a manner suggesting hasty disposal decades ago, and with bated breath. I unclasped it to reveal a sepia-toned photograph of a young woman bearing an uncanny resemblance to myself. In my younger years, her dark curls framing a joyful smile as she posed alongside a man whose features stirred vague, unsettling recollections from the recesses of my childhood memories. But before I could delve deeper into that haunting familiarity, a distant creak resonated from the floorboards above, jolting me upright and propelling me to thrust the locket into my jeans pocket before scrambling back up the stairs and out to the safety of my vehicle. The weight of that discovery pressing upon me like an invisible burden as I drove away with a single burning question dominating my thoughts about the identity of the individuals captured in that tiny frame and what their presence in my basement could possibly signify for the future I was desperately trying to construct. Later that afternoon, as Tom's insistent call pierced the tension of my workday at the local real estate agency where I had recently taken a position to stabilize our finances, his voice slurring slightly from what I suspected was a liquid lunch as he lambasted me for complicating the house sale and accused me of sabotaging his fresh start with some new paramour. I discreetly activated the voice recording function on my phone without alerting him to the fact, allowing his tirade to unfold in full detail about my supposed dramatic tendencies and how they had always been the root of our marital discord. And once he exhausted his venomous monologue, I composed a succinct email attaching the audio file to his supervisor at the bank along with a polite notation that this behavior might warrant a review under the company's conduct policies. The subsequent influx of his apologetic texts providing a fleeting sense of vindication because in the game of post-divorce maneuvering, a well-timed counterstrike could level the playing field without descending into outright confrontation, though deep down I knew this small triumph paled against the enigma now residing in my pocket that threatened to upend everything I held dear. Transitioning our uprooted lives into that nondescript roadside motel on the outskirts of Willow Creek turned out to be far more challenging than I had anticipated. With its paper-thin walls that amplified every cough from the adjacent room and the incessant buzz of the neon vacancy sign flickering through the curtains like a mocking reminder of our temporary displacement. Yet I forced myself to adopt an upbeat facade for Emma and Jake, spinning tales of this unexpected detour as a thrilling mini vacation complete with access to the motel's outdated arcade games and bottomless coffee from the lobby machine, all while concealing the locket's ominous discovery in the depths of my purse where it seemed to radiate a subtle heat against my thigh whenever I shifted position, urging me to unravel its secrets without alarming the children who were already grappling with the upheaval of switching schools mid-semester and missing the comforts of their own beds. The days stretched into a monotonous routine of balancing school shuttles with my part-time shifts at the real estate office, where colleagues shot me sympathetic glances assuming this was just another fallout from the divorce rather than the inexplicable horror unearthed in our new home. And Tom's relentless voicemails piled up like unpaid bills, each one laced with escalating demands for me to cease this foolishness and finalize the house sale so he could pocket his cut without further delays that he claimed were crippling his ability to provide for the kids in the manner they deserved, his tone dripping with that hypocritical concern he reserved for moments when he needed leverage. Especially after my little recording stunt had apparently ruffled feathers at the bank judging by the terse apology he'd sent through his lawyer the previous evening. A development that brought a wry smile to my lips amid the chaos, because watching him squirm from afar felt like a small reclamation of the power he'd stripped away during our marriage. By Thursday afternoon, the strain was evident in Emma's increasingly sarcastic remarks about our glamorous accommodations and Jake's withdrawal into marathon gaming sessions on his laptop that drained the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, prompting me to suggest a quick run back to the house under the guise of retrieving forgotten essentials like Jake's favorite controller and Emma's volleyball uniform, a plan that allowed me to park several blocks away to minimize encounters with prying eyes, particularly those of Linda Hargrove, the quintessential neighborhood snoop in her early 60s who resided next door with her meticulously groomed poodle and a penchant for disseminating half-truths faster than the local newsletter could print them. Her recent wave from her porch the day we evacuated having carried an undercurrent of predatory curiosity that made my skin prickle, as if she were already weaving narratives about the Jenkins family's sudden exodus to anyone who would listen at the grocery store or bridge club. While the kids dove into their rooms upstairs to pack what they needed with the enthusiasm of scavengers reclaiming territory, I seized the opportunity to slip away to the bathroom where Mike's tarp still fluttered ominously over the exposed wall like a poorly bandaged wound, my pulse quickening as I tugged it aside and ventured down those shadowed stairs once more. The air below even denser with that cloying blend of damp earth and latent rust that now seemed almost accusatory in its persistence, coating my throat with each breath as I swept my flashlight across the cluttered floor in search of anything that might contextualize the locket's presence. It didn't take long before the beam illuminated a rusted metal tin half-submerged in the dirt near where I had found the locket, its lid pried open by time or previous disturbance to spill forth a cluster of faded Polaroid photographs that I gathered with careful hands, each image capturing slices of life from the 1980s that struck a dissonant chord within me, depicting family outings to county fairs with cotton candy sticky faces and backyard barbecues under string lights, where laughter appeared genuine yet strained. But it was the recurring figures that halted my breath, a woman with cascading dark curls identical to those in the locket, her arm linked with two young children who mirrored Emma and Jake's builds in uncanny ways, and beside her a stern-faced man whose profile evoked fragmented memories of my father Victor from before he abandoned us when I was 8, leaving behind a trail of unpaid utilities and whispered rumors among relatives about his volatile temper at the local mill where he toiled long shifts amid the roar of machinery and the acrid bite of molten steel. Tucking the photos into my jacket alongside the locket, I ascended swiftly just as voices drifted from the backyard fence, Linda's saccharine inquiry about our well-being slicing through the afternoon calm as she leaned over with a tray of what smelled like store-bought lemon bars, her eyes darting past me into the house as if hunting for evidence to fuel her gossip mill. And I mumbled platitudes about minor plumbing woes while inwardly seething at how she had likely already painted me as the unstable divorcee fleeing her own folly to the entire block. A narrative that could jeopardize my real estate prospects if it spread to clients who valued discretion in suburban transactions. That night, after settling the kids with assurances that normalcy would resume soon and fielding another barrage of texts from Tom about how my theatrics were alienating him from the children, I retreated to the motel's dimly lit lobby with my laptop balanced on a wobbly table, diving into online archives of Willow Creek's historical records where digitized newspapers from the 1980s painted a picture of economic strife at the mill with reports of unexplained absences among workers' families, including a missing persons bulletin for Elena Voss, the name attached to the Lockett's woman in one grainy article, whose disappearance in 1987 had been chalked up to a runaway case despite suspicions from her coworkers about foul play tied to union disputes. A thread that tugged insistently at my recollections of my mother's own vanishing act shortly after Dad left, her vague letters from supposed relatives in California tapering off until silence swallowed her whole, leaving me to wonder if these artifacts from the basement bridged gaps I had long assumed unbridgeable. Lost in this digital excavation, my focus shattered when my phone vibrated with a message from an unidentified sender cautioning me to abandon my inquiries before they unearthed troubles best left dormant, a vague threat that propelled me to the window where, beneath the glow of a street lamp across the parking lot, a lone figure stood motionless in the shadows, his outline too deliberate to be a weary traveler, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on our room's curtained facade, sending a cascade of dread through me that blurred the line between past hauntings and present perils as I drew the drapes tighter, questioning whether Linda's meddling had summoned the sentinel or if the house's buried truths had clawed their way into the light to pursue me relentlessly. The following morning, as notifications buzzed about the township's code enforcement investigation into Linda's backyard shed An unpermitted structure I'd anonymously reported with time-stamped photos from my initial house tour that highlighted its flagrant violations of setback rules and zoning ordinances. I savored my lukewarm coffee from the motel dispenser with a quiet sense of poetic justice, observing from afar as officials arrived at her property with measuring tapes and clipboards while she gesticulated wildly in protest, her empire of nosiness temporarily dismantled by the very bureaucracy she so loved to exploit against others, a clever retaliation that restored a sliver of equilibrium to my unraveling world even as the watcher's silhouette re-emerged at the lot's perimeter, inching closer under the pretense of casual observation and amplifying the urgency of the mysteries now entwined with my every step. Unloading the weight of those cryptic photographs and the locket's haunting implications onto my longtime friend Rachel during our impromptu coffee rendezvous at the Greasy Spoon Diner on the edge of Willow Creek proved to be a tentative release valve for the mounting pressure that had been compressing my chest since discovering the basement's secrets, her familiar face across the scarred Formica tabletop offering a semblance of the normalcy we had shared during late-night study sessions back in our college days when we bonded over shared dreams of stable careers and uncomplicated families. Though I carefully skirted the edges of the full truth by framing the finds as intriguing relics from the house's previous owners rather than potential links to my own fractured lineage, because admitting the watcher or the metallic tang's persistence might have branded me as unraveling under divorce stress in her eyes, prompting unwanted interventions like wellness checks or suggestions to seek counseling that I wasn't ready to entertain amid the kids' growing restlessness. Rachel listened intently over steaming mugs of diner brew that tasted faintly of burnt grounds and nostalgia, her empathetic squeezes of my hand interspersing nods of understanding as she recalled similar tales from her own family lore about hidden compartments in their ancestral farmhouse yielding unexpected heirlooms during renovations. But when I obliquely mentioned the 1980s mill connections from the photos, her expression shifted to one of subdued recognition, drawing from her position as a part-time archivist at the county museum, where she had cataloged exhibits on Willow Creek's industrial heyday, recounting off-the-cuff anecdotes about a cluster of unsolved disappearances during that era when the steel mill dominated the local economy like a monolithic overlord. Workers' spouses, and even a few children vanishing without traces amid whispers of labor unrest and corporate cover-ups. Designed to maintain production quotas during Reagan-era recessions that hit the Rust Belt hardest, her voice lowering conspiratorially as she described how union reps like my father Victor had been at the epicenter of those tensions, advocating fiercely against unsafe conditions that allegedly extended to off-site reprisals against outspoken families, a revelation that sent a jolt through me because it wove the Lockett's Elena Voss directly into the fabric of those shadowy events. Her name popping up in Rachel's memory as the wife of a mill foreman whose abrupt absence in 1987 had fueled tabloid speculation about foul play tied to embezzlement scandals, mirroring the abrupt silence that had followed my mother's departure and leaving me to ponder if the basement artifacts represented echoes of a larger conspiracy or merely coincidental debris from the town's turbulent past. Bolstered yet unsettled by this exchange, I returned to the motel where the atmosphere had thickened with adolescent suspicion. Emma pinning me with probing questions in the cramped bathroom about whether our prolonged stay stemmed from financial woes or something more sinister involving Dad's intermittent custody threats that always surfaced like clockwork around holidays. Her intuition sharpened by years of overhearing my tense phone calls, while Jake hovered nearby feigning disinterest in his handheld game, but absorbing every word with the quiet acuity of a boy who had learned to read between the lines of adult discord, compelling me to orchestrate a diversionary family pizza night at the local chain restaurant where the fluorescent lights and unlimited soda refills masked our underlying fractures. The gooey cheese and pepperoni slices providing a temporary truce as we laughed over Jake's exaggerated retellings of schoolyard escapades and Emma's eye rolls at my outdated slang, yet beneath the surface camaraderie, the locket weighed heavily in my pocket like a talisman of unresolved dread that I dared not examine further in their presence. The following day, driven by Rachel's insights and a compulsion to connect more dots without fully immersing myself in the abyss, I ventured to the public library's reference section amid its hushed aisles lined with towering shelves of leather-bound volumes and humming microfiche machines that evoked a bygone era of analog research. Spending hours squinting at grainy reels that chronicled the mill's 1986 strike, where Dad had emerged as a vocal leader railing against management for hazardous exposures to fumes and machinery that claimed lives quietly through attrition. Articles detailing how several women associated with the union, including Elena, had mysteriously absconded after attending clandestine meetings, their cases dismissed as domestic flights despite community petitions for deeper investigations that were quashed by influential town fathers eager to preserve jobs and reputations, and one faded byline even referenced Victor Jenkins by name in connection to a heated confrontation outside the plant gates, where accusations of silencing dissent flew like sparks from a welder's torch, stirring dormant memories of my childhood evenings spent waiting for him to return home reeking of sweat and steel dust, his moods swinging between affectionate storytelling and brooding silences that foreshadowed his eventual exit stage left. This immersion in historical grit was rudely interrupted when Tom's battered pickup truck screeched into the library parking lot visible through the window, his hulking frame barreling through the doors with the bluster of a man who believed volume equated to authority, cornering me at the copier with demands to sign over the house deed immediately or face legal repercussions that would paint me as an unfit parent in court, his breath hot with the faint sourness of recent beer as he loomed over the scattered printouts, ranting about how my irrational delays were not only draining his resources, but also poisoning the kids against him through this nomadic lifestyle that he derisively called my midlife rebellion, his words slicing into vulnerabilities I had worked hard to armor since the affair's exposure. Rather than engaging in the shouting match he craved, I maintained a composed facade while slipping my phone beneath the table to capture his unfiltered vitriol in high-fidelity audio. Then later that evening from the motel's secure Wi-Fi, enlisted Rachel's TechWiz nephew via a discreet video call to navigate the remnants of a shared cloud account from our married days that Tom had negligently failed to sever, granting access to his inbox, where a trove of incriminating emails with his bank colleague unfolded in explicit detail, their flirtations escalating to weekend getaways that he had funded from our joint savings before the split, and with a few strategic forwards disguised as accidental group messages to his professional network under a neutral subject line about relationship transparency workshops. I watched the digital dominoes fall as replies flooded in with shock and calls for meetings, Tom's frantic voicemail shifting from outrage to desperate pleas for mercy that elicited a sardonic chuckle from me because in the intricate dance of retribution following betrayal, exposing his duplicity to the very colleagues he courted for advancement served as a scalpel-precise strike that humbled without drawing blood, restoring a measure of agency even as the thrill dissipated against the backdrop of deeper enigmas. Yet this Pyrrhic victory offered scant solace when, under the pretense of essential errands while the kids believed I was restocking the mini-fridge, I returned to the house alone that twilight hour, the structure looming with an almost sentient watchfulness as I approached the bathroom where the tarp had sagged further from disuse, and upon descending the stairs into that subterranean murk, the damp earth aroma assaulted me anew with intensified potency as if freshly disturbed soil after a storm, permeating my nostrils and evoking visceral unease that propelled me to probe the crevices along the stairwell's frame with a sturdy flashlight and an old screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, my efforts yielding a concealed nook behind a loose panel where a weathered leather journal dislodged into my grasp, its pages brittle and warped from humidity, yet inscribed with handwriting that matched the sparse notes Dad had left before vanishing. The initial entries from 1985 chronicling escalating disputes with shadowy mill associates over safeguarding family interests at any cost. Phrases like burying the evidence to forge a clean slate leaping off the yellowed paper in a script that twisted my gut with recognition and revulsion, compelling me to pore over the lines by the feeble glow until approaching headlights pierced the driveway gloom, forcing me to conceal the Journal in my waistband and exfiltrate through the rear door with stealth born of necessity. My mind reeling from the implications that this intimate artifact might finally illuminate the voids in my heritage or plunge me irrevocably into a vortex of inherited sins from which there could be no return. That weathered journal became an unrelenting specter in my possession, its leather cover rough against my fingertips whenever I retrieved it from its hiding spot beneath the motel's sagging mattress during those stolen moments when the kids were absorbed in their homework or scrolling through social feeds. Its pages filled with Dad's looping script that chronicled a labyrinth of moral compromises stretching back to the mid-1980s when the mill's relentless demands on its workforce had eroded the boundaries between survival and desperation. Entries detailing heated exchanges with unnamed colleagues about silencing rumors that could topple the fragile union structure and imperil the livelihoods of families like ours who depended on those grueling shifts to keep the lights on and food on the table. But it was the recurring motif of concealment, phrases invoking the necessity of interring inconvenient realities to allow for rebirth, that gnawed at me most profoundly, evoking fragmented recollections of my 8th birthday when Mom's suitcase had vanished from the hall closet overnight and Dad's explanations had dissolved into evasive grunts amid the clatter of breakfast dishes. A prelude to his own departure that left me adrift in foster-like arrangements with distant aunts who viewed me more as an obligation than kin. The temptation to march straight to the sheriff's office with this artifact warred fiercely within me against the visceral dread of unleashing a media circus that would plaster our faces across local news outlets as the Jenkins clan entangled in some archaic scandal. Emma's budding social life at school derailed by whispers of generational dysfunction, and Jake's fragile self-esteem shattered by classmates' cruel memes, not to mention Tom's opportunistic swoop to leverage the chaos for full custody under the guise of providing stability, a scenario that would validate every one of his past barbs about my inability to shield our children from life's harsher edges. So instead, I opted for a circuitous path by emailing scanned excerpts to Harlan Ellis, the self-appointed custodian of Willow Creek's historical narrative whose ponderous tome on the town's industrial legacy sat gathering dust on library shelves. Framing my inquiry as academic curiosity about mill-era diaries to mask the personal stakes that made my palms sweat as I hit send from the motel's glitchy connection. Ellis responded within hours with an effusive invitation to his cluttered area above the Antique Emporium on Main Street, a warren of rooms stacked floor to ceiling with yellowed maps, sepia photographs, and curios from the town's founding that smelled of aged paper and pipe tobacco, where he welcomed me with a watery handshake and a monologue on the era's economic perils that had forged men of iron will, his voice a gravelly timbre honed from years of lecturing to uninterested Rotary Club audiences. But as I presented the locket, photos, and journal snippets across his oak desk scarred by decades of use, his affable demeanor cracked subtly with a hesitation in his recitation of Union lore, admitting under gentle probing that Victor had been more than a mere agitator, but a pivotal figure in quelling dissent after the 1986 strike, where whispers of off-the-books reprisals against vocal wives like Elena Voss circulated among the old-timers, her entanglement with a foreman allegedly leading to a clandestine resolution buried deeper than the mill's foundations. And when I pressed for clarity on the journal's allusions to paternal safeguards, Ellis's eyes darted to the window overlooking the bustling street below, his counsel shifting to a paternal admonition against dredging up fossils that could fracture the community's hard-won peace, a veiled threat laced with the implication that some truths served the living better entombed, leaving me to depart his sanctum with more questions than answers and a creeping suspicion that his scholarly veneer concealed alliances forged in those same turbulent years. The drive back to the motel amplified my internal turmoil. The journals weighed in my bag, a constant prod toward decisions that prioritized our insular family's facade over the cathartic justice of exposure, a choice that even I recognized as short-sighted in the quiet recesses of my mind yet felt inexorable given the stakes, particularly as Tom's latest cease and desist letter arrived via email that evening, his lawyer citing my so-called sabotage of his career through the leaked messages as, Grounds for reevaluating support obligations, a low blow that ignited a retaliatory spark within me directed not at him this time, but at Ellis's gatekeeping of the past. Fueled by a blend of indignation and insomnia, I commandeered the motel's ancient desktop in the lobby under the guise of job applications, cross-referencing Ellis's publications with digitized worker testimonies from online labor archives that contradicted his sanitized portrayals of the mill as a beacon of blue-collar pride, revealing omissions of safety violations and hushed settlements that smacked of institutional whitewashing. And with a few anonymous posts to the Historical Society's forum and a viral thread on the local Reddit community, I disseminated curated excerpts framing his work as revisionist fluff that romanticized exploitation while ignoring the human cost, the backlash materializing by dawn in heated comment chains, where former mill families voiced long-suppressed grievances and Ellis's name trended as a punchline for selective memory, a digital takedown that spared no mercy yet stopped short of personal libel, affording me a cathartic chuckle over my vending machine snack, because if he sought to hoard history's uncomfortable facets, I democratized the narrative just enough to tarnish his pedestal without inviting lawsuits that could boomerang onto my doorstep. This fleeting empowerment eroded swiftly upon returning to our room, where the air hung heavy with unspoken accusations as Emma and Jake sat cross-legged on the queen bed amid scattered snack wrappers. Their expressions a mirror of guilty complicity that made my stomach plummet when they confessed to their clandestine return to the house earlier that afternoon on a borrowed bike from a motel acquaintance, driven by boredom and a desire to reclaim personal items under the radar of my overprotectiveness. But what they unveiled from Jake's backpack, a small, desiccated bone fragment no larger than a matchstick, unearthed from the loose soil at the base of the basement stairs during their ill-advised exploration, shattered any illusions of containment. Its irregular contours and faint discoloration under the lamp's glare evoking not some harmless animal relic, but a fragment of something profoundly human that tied inexorably to the journal's veiled confessions, their wide-eyed recounting of the intensified damp reek and the soil's almost magnetic tug on their shoes, painting a tableau of youthful recklessness that I had unwittingly enabled through my own evasive maneuvers, compelling me to envelop them in a fierce embrace while my thoughts spiraled into a maelstrom of recriminations about whether this tangible evidence demanded immediate surrender to authorities or if preserving our fragile equilibrium warranted one final act of burial, a dilemma that left me staring into the night with the bones chill seeping through the evidence bag and the dawning horror that the past tendrils had ensnared us all beyond escape. Contemplating that brittle bone fragment under the motel's unforgiving fluorescent lamp transformed it from a mere curiosity into an accusatory relic that seemed to pulse with the unresolved grievances of decades past, its porous texture and subtle marrow hollows mocking my earlier rationalizations about it being nothing more than a disrupted rabbit femur or some innocuous farmyard remnant disturbed by the renovation's upheaval. Yet the analytical report I procured the next morning from the County Agricultural Extension Office, where I presented it casually as an artifact unearthed during gardening to avoid raising flags, only confirmed its mammalian origin without dispelling the insidious doubt that it could represent a fraction of a far graver narrative tied to the journal's oblique references to hasty interments and the locket's frozen smiles, compelling me to integrate this latest find into the mosaic of evidence that now cluttered my mental landscape like puzzle pieces from a nightmare I couldn't wake from, each one hinting at my father's complicity in shielding the mill's darkest undercurrents from scrutiny that might have unraveled the entire community's economic lifeline during those lean Reagan years when job losses loomed like storm clouds over the Rust Belt horizon. With this tangible proof in hand alongside the photos, journal, and locket, I resolved to confront Harlan Ellis one final time, not in his scholarly lair, but at the periphery of his antique shop as dusk settled over Main Street, the autumn chill nipping at my heels as I waited in the lengthening shadows until he emerged to lock up, his pipe clenched between teeth yellowed from years of indulgence, and without preamble, I thrust the bundle before him on the sidewalk where passers-by hurried past. Oblivious to the personal apocalypse unfolding, demanding elucidation on the connections that bound Victor Jenkins to Elena Voss's fate and the cryptic passages about familial burials that echoed too closely with my mother's unexplained exodus. My voice steady despite the tremor in my limbs as I watched his facade crumble under the weight of accumulated secrets, his confessions spilling forth in fragmented admissions that he was indeed Dad's estranged cousin. The shadowy watcher who had trailed me since the basement revelation to preempt any excavations that could exhume scandals long interred for the sake of kin and community alike. Ellis's words painted a harrowing tableau of 1987 desperation, where Mom, revealed as Elena's younger sister entangled in the same union intrigues through her marriage to Victor, had stumbled upon evidence of a fatal workplace mishap twisted into murder to silence a whistleblower foreman. A cover-up orchestrated by mill executives with Dad's reluctant aid in relocating the body via those subterranean tunnels, snaking beneath Willow Creek properties like veins of forgotten ore. The locket dropped in her flight, and the journal's entries a desperate chronicle of his rationalizations for participating to protect us from reprisals that would orphan me completely, but ambiguity shrouded the details like fog on the Cuyahoga River. For was the act self-preservation against corporate thugs or a descent into complicity that mirrored the very corruptions Dad had railed against? And did the bone fragment corroborate a human victim or serve as a macabre distraction from truths Ellis himself might have helped fabricate in his historical sanitizations? As his narrative trailed into pleas for discretion, the wail of approaching sirens shattered the intimacy of our exchange, drawing my gaze to the shop's facade where Ellis's earlier indiscretions now bore fruit in the form of a police cordon prompted by my meticulously planted digital breadcrumbs. Anonymous tips to the Historical Society alleging his tampering with mill-era artifacts to suppress labor atrocity records, complete with forged timestamps on scanned documents that implicated him in archival fraud without implicating me, a Machiavellian framing that positioned him as the villainous curator while I slipped away into the twilight throng. The satisfaction of this intellectual checkmate mingling with a hollow ache, because vengeance against a gatekeeper of half-truths felt like swatting at shadows when the real phantoms resided within my bloodline. Returning to the motel one last time to gather our scant belongings, I found Emma and Jake dozing fitfully amid the detritus of our exile, their innocence a stark counterpoint to the moral quagmire I navigated, propelling me toward a unilateral decision to excise the poison at its root by driving us back to the house under cover of night, the structure's silhouette against the starry sky evoking a final reckoning as I ushered the kids into the station wagon with promises of a permanent relocation to a nondescript rental across the state line where fresh starts could flourish untainted by Ohio's rusting legacies. Alone in the basement's oppressive confines, flashlight beam cutting through the renewed dampness that now carried an undernote of finality, I arranged the journal, photos, locket, and bone in a makeshift pyre at the stairs base, dousing them with the accelerant from the garage's lawnmower reserve and igniting the blaze with a match that flared bright in the gloom, the flames devouring paper and metal in a hypnotic dance that released acrid smoke billowing upward as I retreated to the yard, dialing emergency services moments later to report an accidental electrical short in the subfloor that necessitated swift containment, the arriving fire crew's hoses quenching the inferno before it spread while I observed from the shadows with a composure born of exhaustion, the evidence reduced to ash that scattered on the autumn wind like exorcised demons. Yet as the cleanup commenced and Ellis's vehicle idled across the street under the watchful eyes of investigators summoned by my orchestrated leaks, his defeated stare locking onto mine through the windshield with a blend of betrayal and reluctant understanding, a profound unease settled over me because in choosing incineration over illumination, had I severed the cycle of concealment that ensnared Dad and Mom, granting my children a legacy unburdened by spectral debts, or merely perpetuated it by becoming the new archivist of buried atrocities, shielding them from truths that might forge resilience rather than fracture it further. We motored away at dawn toward horizons unmarred by Willow Creek's whispers, Emma chattering animatedly about decorating our new space, and Jake syncing his playlist to the dashboard, their optimism a balm against the uncertainties gnawing at my core. But in the rearview mirror, as the town receded into a hazy silhouette, questions lingered like embers refusing to die. Had I liberated us from a grave's embrace, or merely relocated its shadow to trail us indefinitely and in the quiet? Calculus of survival versus honesty, which path truly broke the chains or merely forged new ones in disguise?